Good morning, my friend.
Good morning, Scott. How you doing, my man?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Good, thank you.
So let's get set up here for part three. So for those folks that um, have not been part of part one and part two, what we're trying to do here in this three-part garage series is, I would say, an expression I sometimes use is coding the brush. So we have part one, very high level description of some event-driven architecture concepts like queue and a topic and a mesh and things like that. And that was the idea to kind of coat the brush, get people going. And then in the next part two, what we covered is a little bit more detail where we had a discussion around, we did a little review of some of the concepts, and then we showed the demo scenario that we had, and then we introduced the advanced event mesh console. We took a quick tour through that. And so today what I did was I put together a few slides that talks about some of the architectural options for building things with event-driven architecture, especially as it relates to some of the SAP core technologies, which is one, it's an integration suite, and the other one is UI5, which is Fiori, integration cards, workzone, all that kind of stuff, and how that would come together. So the goal is we're going to run through some of those slides today, have a discussion around some of the points that are associated with each option, and then we'll pop out into the environment, which reminds me, while I am about to do that, I'll just start up the Business Application Studio, because sometimes that takes a few minutes to start. So I'll get that running in the meantime, which I just clicked on start. So let me bring up those slides, Ush, and we'll take a look at those, okay?
Sounds good, my man.
All right, so let's go. Share screen, entire screen left. Wonder, is it possible to just do the PowerPoint? Doesn't look like it. So let's do the entire screen. Let's bring this up here and let's get into it. So welcome back again. Welcome back, everybody. Part three, Solace Garage, myself, Scott Dillon, and Ush Shukla from Solace. And so just a quick review. So this was the application that we had demonstrated in the last session. And one of the things that we wanted to, so number one, these are a series of integration cards that SAP provides a framework for. And if you want to find more about that, you can go to UI5.sap.com and you can get all kinds of details on there. And I'll show you a little bit of that a little bit later. But the idea was on one screen, excuse me, to have something simple where we could have a publisher, something that would basically a form, and this could be any form, but we chose to do it with integration cards. So basically taking some input from the screen and then quote unquote publishing it to the advanced event mesh, and then having a few sentences to it based on a topic. And so this first card was basically a straight up consumer. So something is published on the left and it's consumed on the right. And then this card was a little bit different because what we also wanted to show was the ability for an event to kick off in real time in iFlow and kind of see what that looks like from a response perspective. Is it going to take a couple of minutes for that to happen? Is it going to take place in a couple of seconds? And we've demonstrated that's usually pretty quick, which will show that. And if we have time, we're going to build that from scratch so you see what that looks like. And then a simple analytic, just to kind of show that, data can be updated on the screen in real time. You don't have to necessarily go out and retrieve it to have that happen. And then in part two of the series, what we did is we went out and we showed people what the event portal could be used for to kind of, I would say, trending towards operationalizing your event-driven architecture, because this is where you'd want to define your events and define your schemas and define your topics. And then once you start defining all that, you can have it reflect what your runtime looks like. So this was a snapshot I took of my environment that represents this screen here. So you'll see at the top, this is the Fiori notification card, and this represents the Fiori notification card. So very quickly, if you can notice the directional arrow here, it has a flow whereby it's publishing this SCP notification event. And during our part 2, we showed you how to go into the portal, create that with the associated schema and topic. So it's publishing this, and then we also have an application here within the broker called RDP that's again taking that event and it publishes one called SCP notification details, and that's being picked up by cloud integration. So cloud integration is basically kicking off iFlows in response to this notification detail event. And then what it does is does a small modification to the event, and it publishes a new event called the assign notification details, which has the assigned technician, which is reflected in another event. So this is kind of the map or the design time view of this real running application. So it kind of gives you a different perspective on that. And so architecturally wise, and this is what you and I now wish I want to discuss before we show people kind of behind the curtain.
Sure.
Just to kind of have an idea here. So I worked for SCP for a very long time, very well aware that a lot of the UI5 applications that are out there have historically been built with REST and OData. Nothing wrong with that. So what we're trying to do today is just give people an understanding and some knowledge about maybe there's other ways you can do it, and maybe there's some associated advantages of doing so. So right off the bat, you can see here that from this notification card, I could have done it this way, I just chose not to. So from this notification card, what we do is in behind the scenes, we publish through a WebSocket the data that's on this form in a very simple JSON format, and we publish it over to the Integration Suite Advanced Event Mesh. And then this Advanced Event Mesh from there, now we have it on the mesh, so it becomes very easy to share and make available to other locations. And so we've got I put down three main options, where we have the Integration Suite Advanced Event Mesh using a capability called RDP to then push that message using REST over to the SCP backend. So maybe even potentially the same service that would be used here to create a notification or a sales order, whatever service you're using, you'd be calling that same service through this RDP functionality. Or high level option number 2, we pass the message off, like we will show today, to Integration Suite and let Integration Suite do its thing, AKA transform that message into whatever format it needs to be in. And then you can pick your adapter of choice. So Integration Suite, it's one of the world's, one of the leading integration platforms in market. Been proven many times by, Gartner and the different reviews that they do. But you pick your connector of choice. So, if you want to use an IDOC, fine, HTTP REST call, using that same, again, that REST OData service, you could do that. Or notice there's an arrow here out the top. So you might choose to send that message or that event in to Integration Suite, modify it somewhat, the format, pass it back to the event mesh, and then have it processed up here. So this is option number 2. And then option number 3, of course, SCP over the past couple of years, they've started down the path of microservices, and then they provide a framework for building those using a model called CAP-M. So that's another approach where you could use a CAP application maybe to tap into the event mesh, take those events off, and then maybe do something custom and also apply it like this. So there's many ways, and there's advantages and disadvantages, I'm sure, associated with each. But what I want to do, maybe, Ush, just to, before I get into the slide that zooms in on this box for a second, what exactly is this thing called RDP that's part of the Advanced Event Mesh?
Cool. So the RDP is, so first let's get, the acronym straight. It's a REST delivery point. And it's a way that you can, or it's a mechanism offered in the Advanced Event Mesh for triggering or invoking RESTful endpoints. So if we're talking, for folks who were who attended part 1 and 2 or viewed part 1 and 2, we have to recall that Advanced Event Mesh, generally speaking, is about pub sub, right? Publish, subscribe, asynchronous kind of communication. But suppose you wanted to marry the two and say, from my asynchronous platform, which AEM is, I also want to be able to call RESTful services, which are traditionally synchronous. And so RDPs, again, REST delivery points, allow you to do that. So they mesh the best of both worlds, right? They give you the power of queuing and pub sub, but also let you call those tried and tested HTTP services.
Gotcha. Okay, and then one thing that I have on this diagram, you can see I've got multiple lines. So why would I have multiple lines here from the advanced event mesh into a backend like that?
Cool. So that's one of the benefits of the RDP feature in the advanced event mesh, is this capability of doing multi-threading or opening up multiple threads against the SAP backend, right? Or the service hosted over there. And those threads are scalable. So if it's as we'll see shortly, if it's it's a legacy service which can't handle much traffic, then the AEM can constrain that and make sure that it's only ever getting one request at a time.
Okay.
If it's a brand new service and it can handle everything you throw at it, then go ahead and jack up those threads as high as you want, and the RDP will make sure that there are threads out to that service for all the requests that are coming in.
Gotcha. That makes total sense to me. I hope it makes sense to other folks that might be on the call with us right now. So then let's take a look. What exactly is the advantage of putting the advanced event mesh as the first receiver, of this message? And so we were talking about some of these things yesterday in preparation for the event, and we talked about this concept of a shock absorber. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Sure. So if we revisit the idea of the RDP, right? I just said a second ago that it's actually an asynchronous. It's a way of calling synchronous services using something that's fundamentally asynchronous, which is the AEM service, the broker. And the way it's doing that is through queuing. So there's actually a queue that's attached to the service on the AEM side. So when a message comes in, it gets put in the queue, or in queued, if you will. And then the broker takes care of saying, okay, I'm going to go ahead and call that service for you on your behalf, using traditional HTTP. Now, suppose you have maybe a Black Friday event or some other event which has a huge spike in load. Traditionally, that could mean that you might exhaust the service you're trying to call on the SAP side potentially, or any other service really, and bring it down, which is the worst possible outcome, right? Then all of a sudden that service isn't providing any service.
Right.
What the shock absorber, because we have a queue in the AEM that fronts the RDP or that fronts the service, it can essentially queue up all those requests that are coming in. So even if you have a huge burst of requests, they get queued up and parsed out to the service at a rate it can handle. And the cool thing is you don't lose those messages, right? It's not as if the service isn't available, I'm stuck. They just end up in the queue, and as and when the service gets free, it just gets the next request, and so on and so forth.
Gotcha. And I think what we'll show a little bit later is you can even specify the timeout for each of those calls, right? So you have the multi-threaded, multiple multiple connections going out, and you also have the timeout on the service as well. So then how does that differ then from the second point that you and I talked about a little yesterday, which is the legacy services that are technically constrained? What's the difference in those two?
Well, they're related, right? So suppose I don't have, let's keep things simple. Suppose I don't have a burst of messages coming in, but I do have a very, very old service. So I recall working with a client once that had an ancient database that was really just had a single threaded HTTP interface. And if you threw more than one thread at it or threw too many messages at it, it tanked, it fell over. And I'm laughing because despite being so old, it was actually the backbone of that entire company's everything. It was their
Wow.
So if it went down, everything went down.
Gotcha.
And so that was a standing problem they had. We brought the RDP feature in, and all of a sudden they were able to control how frequently that database service was called. and
it.
thereby prevent it from going down, being overwhelmed and going down.
Right, because with the configuration, you could specify only one connection into it, and it would just go through the queue and execute the transactions, right?
Yep, exactly.
Okay, awesome. So then we have this, high level one here, which this is one of the ones that I'm personally enamored with, which is client applications benefiting from being loosely coupled. And so we've got a couple of points here, and one of them is the producer doesn't need to be aware of the consumer. This is a big one for me because, my time at SAP, sometimes the feedback we hear back is, when you want to build a UI5 Fiori app, if you bring on a new developer, he or she then would need to understand the specifics of OData. They need to understand the specifics of the service. So this can be, it's definitely a learning curve for sure. And this is not to imply that you don't need to understand the SAP backend service, because I made a note here. Of course you do. But that could be part of a microservice that ideally the calling application, as in this case, never needs to know about. And so are you seeing this, being like when you talk to customers in your day-to-day travels, do customers pick up on this point about the loosely coupled?
Oh,
or is
absolutely.
it a marketing thing?
No, it's a very real thing, not just a marketing thing. Because what we're saying here is it's about simplicity, right? And keeping your Fiori app, for example, simple.
Mm-hmm.
That same data from that app may need to go to 10, 20, 30 different services.
Right.
Now, in the old world, prior to this idea of loosely coupling, I'm having to change my app, my Fiori app, potentially every single time a new service comes on board, because I'm making direct calls out to those services, saying direct synchronous calls, right? Which are the opposite. They're tightly coupled because my Fiori app knows about those services, and it makes for too much technical debt over time. So, I'm adding one service, fine. Two, fine. Okay, I can make that happen. 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 20, 30. All of a sudden it gets untenable because I have to maintain too many endpoints. The app becomes bloated. It becomes error prone. Maybe one service breaks, the entire app fails. You get into all sorts of, or maybe if I have too many services, then all of a sudden the app is taking a long time to respond. And that's especially bad if it's a user interface, right? Because then this person is just sitting there staring.
Right. Absolutely.
With this idea of loosely coupled, all of a sudden I'm freed from that. I just need to know where the AEM service is. I hand it off to the AEM service, and then AEM takes care of, okay, I have to send this one message, publish it out to these N other services.
Right. No, I gotcha. That makes total sense to me. I love that one. It's my personal favorite. So then highly scalable. We know this because we have a lot of customers today that are doing very much high volume with the service. So it definitely enables that.
Yep.
And then we just talked about this potential for improved customer experience. So we won't talk about that one again. So let's take a quick look. Let me just stop sharing my screen for 1 second. Cool. Let me go back here for a minute. Let's just make sure that the SAP service has started up. Okay, that's running. I'm going to bring up that screen, and then I will share my screen one more time. We're doing 11:20. Yeah, time ticks by pretty quick on these calls. So let's.
Fun, right?
Yeah, 100%. It just goes by so fast. I'm always shocked. Okay, share screen, and then entire screen here, and screen one. Boof. So I just want to make people aware, just quickly. 2 things. So one, let's bring up the actual app itself. And while I'm doing that, I'll just bring people to the SAP website. So this is important. So when you go to the SAP website, UI5.sap.com, just so people know there's no tricks here. Like, so this is an SAP technology that they support and suggest that people use when they're building out these cards, which is the basis of, the new build product and work zone. So when you go to explore samples, you'll see here on the left-hand side that there's a bunch of different cards. So they all have a slightly different perspective. And the way they work in general is that there's a manifest file that creates and holds the metadata for the card. And then what you'll see down below, which is why I've got this manifest.json, and you'll see down below about halfway through, there's a section that's referred to as data. In other words, the content for the card. And you can see here, it says Comfort Easy, Italo Notebook Professional, and those are the items that are right here. So nothing too complicated here. However, now somebody says, well, I'd like to do something more than just, hard coding my values. How does that work? Well, if you look down here on the left-hand side, there's something called an extension. And basically what this is SAP also provides the ability for customers to, and there's a format, right, that first of all, that SAP provides. So you have to stay within the format that they give to a certain point. But the point here is you create this data extension.js. And so what I was able to do is I was able to go out with the help of SAP and a few other folks on the Solace side, create a version of this file that would hook into, via WebSocket, the advanced event mesh. So that as pieces of data are flowing into or out of the card, what happens is it returns, that JavaScript file returns the data structure that was inside of this card. So that's what we're looking to do. We're looking to basically bring back the data for all of these different card types. So when you see this data file, this data structure, that's what we need to create in the data extension.js file. So let's take a quick look back here. So if I look back now at this display, excuse me for 1 second. I look back at this display and I've got these cards. I've got my publisher and I've got my list card here. So whenever I'm creating a notification, it pops up in this window. So if I were to look at the Business Application Studio, I think my card 1 is that list card. So you can see here as an example, just going up here for a second. So this is the manifest.json. It's the card, it's the file that has the metadata properties for this particular card. And so you can see here the notification priority, all select priority as an example, and has title, all, high, medium, and low. So if I went back to that card for a second, I hit the drop down, that's where that's coming from. But then the real question is, and where the real secret sauce is like, okay, well, that's great, but where's the connection to the WebSocket? So now there's some stuff that's hard coded in here, like the WebSocket address and stuff like that. That's not the way you do it in production, but just to show you that it is there. Sorry, people. And so then if I go to the data extension.js file, this is where a couple of things are happening. Number one, we're going to be using the Solace client library. So you can see this on-card ready. So when the on-card ready function is fired, it basically starts loading up some libraries. And there's two important things here. One, this dot underscore data, that's the same structure that we saw referenced on the SAP site. So this is what we need to populate somewhere, somehow in this code in order to get that to render on the screen. And so what we're doing here is we're loading up the Solace client library. And so you can see as part of the card structure, there's a library here where I've uploaded the Solace client libraries. So when you're making a call here to say, hey, load the Solace client library, there has to be something for it to load. So that was a bit of a learning curve for me. So that's kind of there. And that's the way that I've structured it inside of the library, inside a folder called lib. And then when the card loads, it basically runs through some of these functions like the init, where then it uses that Solace client library to connect. And then, for debugging purposes, I registered a whole bunch of different handlers to let me know in the console that things are loading up okay. And then there's this subscribe method here where we do a subscribe to a topic. And the topic that we're subscribing to was listed back here in the manifest.json file. And then what's really important, this is probably the most important part that you want to kind of get straight, is this message received. So I know the name probably implies something here, Ush, but typically when we see this message received, what does it mean exactly?
So the message received over here, the way it's used is basically saying that I'm going to apply a callback function whenever I get a message. So in simpler terms, for folks who may not be familiar with JavaScript, I'm basically saying that whenever I get a message received, do this. Whatever this function says, do that.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So what happens here is we get and I just, because I'm not a expert coder, but I basically just print the message in the console to make sure that I'm getting what I expect. So now we're basically connected. The card itself is connected to the advanced event mesh. So when events are being published in real time, now they're on the mesh. And if I subscribe to the right one, I provide the right topic structure, I get it. And so basically there's a little parse function that I use. And then notice this is a repeat from up top. So this data underscore data, there's a method called unshift, which basically puts this new object called new notification at the top of the array instead of at the bottom. So in other words, when messages start flowing into the screen, they always appear at the top. So you get a nice user experience instead of it potentially scrolling off of the bottom. So that's basically the way that we constructed this application. And it's the same thing essentially for all of the cards where we have this data extension.js. And if you have questions on that, you can reach out and we can talk about that. So let's bring up, go back to the PowerPoint here for a second. And then we'll pop into here for a second. So let's bring this up full screen. So that's on the UI5 integration card, publishing out to the advanced event mesh. But one of the things that I'm doing now also in that app is when we receive a notification, I want to take advantage of Integration Suite because it's a really powerful engine. You can do a lot of things in there. So the question is, how do I use that? And so let's assume for a second that the context that we have here is 5 different environments. And it's not uncommon, right, that you would say, okay, for onboarding as one example, I onboard a new employee into SuccessFactors, and I need to update 4 different other applications. And I've only listed 4, but it's probably 8 or 10 or more, where the new employee record has to flow, or parts of it, to these different applications. For example, I need a badge to access the building. I need an Active Directory account. I need a new laptop. So whatever that is, I see 2 common approaches here. And I also see an opportunity to potentially improve those approaches. So option number 1, somebody would say to me, for sure, they would say, because I've had this conversation at some of the conferences and the innovation days that we're doing. No, that's no problem. He said, I'll just build, an iFlow that either calls each of these applications successively via an API, option number 1 in sequence, or, I can fan it out, like, because Integration Suite does support that. I can do them all in parallel and then bring it back together and process it. True, you could do that. Option number 2, I could create 4 iFlows. So we assume for a second that there's an API that lets us retrieve a newly created employee or a list of newly employees, and I could create an iFlow. So each one of these lines would represent a different source to target iFlow. Each one of those iFlows essentially calling the same API. So in other words, what we're seeing here in that particular approach is that we're always making n-1 extra calls to that API, because if I retrieve the employee, I'm retrieving the exact same employee information 3 other times, when technically we don't need to do that. So that's maybe one of the areas that we could improve upon potentially. And then let's think about that one iFlow, that one large iFlow. So if you create one large iFlow, well, what are the challenges with that? Well, the challenge with that is, if I ever want to add another system, so let's say as an example, I wanted to add in the training system here. Well, how do we do that? Well, what it means is I need to basically modify the existing iFlow already with 4 systems embedded in it. And every time I add a new system, now I got to be aware of, okay, I've updated 2. What if the 3rd one doesn't work? Do I roll back the other 2? Do I continue with the 4th one? It's really quite complicated. So the question is there a better way? Can we architect it in such a way that it could be simpler for maintenance going forward and give you more flexibility. So let's ponder this for a second. So what if SuccessFactors published an event whenever a new employee was created? So we published this one event, and now what we can do, and we're going to show you this very shortly, we could create a queue that would subscribe to that event. And like as an example, we would have maybe employee created, and then employee created topic would determine what was placed in that queue. And then I create a second iFlow. Well, I simply create another queue and subscribe to the events that I want, and so on and so forth. So we end up with potentially the same number of iFlows, but now we've eliminated this potential issue with calling the backend system multiple times. And because we have this flexibility around the topic, I can direct, or I can start the iFlow that I want more or less in real time, which I think is quite beneficial. So we mentioned this idea of fine-grained topics in the last session. So the idea being that you can put whatever topic you want, parts of a topic, all of the topic. You can use wildcards at different levels in the topic. So it allows you to really zoom in on certain events that would then start up this iFlow. And by the way, the iFlow wouldn't be scheduled. It'd be kicked off in real time. So you end up having simpler iFlows, less load on the back end because you're not reaching in all the time. And then the ability to either add new iFlows with zero impact. And if 3 of these work and the other one doesn't, so be it. You can go and investigate what happened here. No problem. So this was the idea behind some of the points we had here, Ush, on when we're talking about integration suite, this idea that iFlows can use readily available protocols to subscribe to event streams. So right now, today, inside of integration suite, we've got the AMQP adapter, which we'll showcase today, but we're right in the middle of creating a custom adapter that's built by us for integration suite, which will have more features and functions. Okay. But then also the idea that iFlows could be triggered in real time and not scheduled. So why do we want to schedule things these days when we can have it happen at the moment that things are happening in a back end? And then this idea of duplicating connections. So we don't have to deal with this duplication of connection if we're publishing an event, which I think would lead to less system load, less complexity, simpler iFlows, easier to maintain, clearly easier to debug. And then this flexibility due to the ability to add additional iFlows with zero impact. So this is a big one for me. And then as people normally come to understand what it means to subscribe based on a flexible topic, it opens up a lot of different options there. But you see this, Ush, like in practice as you're talking to customers, as people integrate with products like Integration Suite or Boomi or MuleSoft, is this something that you see in your day-to-day travels?
Oh, absolutely, right? Because for all the reasons you mentioned there, it just, in summary, what it culminates in is much simpler, smaller integrations rather than these monoliths that then you have to care and feed for.
Right.
And also really opens up the doors or the floodgates of what you can do. Because as you pointed out, right, those different flows, suppose I had responses from those flows that had to go to other places. In the old world, I would have to create more point-to-point integrations to get those responses from these iFlows to other places. In the new AEM world, it's just a matter of, okay, now I'm going to publish it on the response on this topic, and whoever cares about it can go and get that response, right?
Let me stop sharing there for a minute.
All right.
And because we're gonna go into demo time. We got about 20 minutes left, and we're gonna pop over to another environment and let people have a look here. Quick question from Keshav. So hi, Keshav. Quick question. Is RDP similar to a webhook-like connection?
Yes. So there are similarities with webhooks, but there's the added benefit of the AEM that it allows for that buffering and that queuing capability. But yeah, you can start off thinking of it like a webhook, but with more features as far as being able to do error retries, buffering, and many other things.
Awesome. I love it. Okay, let's now share my screen again and pop into. Let's make sure I have up on the screen here before I share my screen. Which one am I going to? Yeah. Okay. Let me try this again. Present. Share screen. Entire screen. Yeah, finally getting the hang of this Streamworks platform.
Yeah, third time's the charm, right?
All right. So exactly three times a charm. So here we are back. So let's get rid of the Business App Studio. And let's pop over to, first of all, what we're going to attempt to do in the time that we have. Would help if I didn't get logged out, but let's hop back in there. What I'd like to do is build it from scratch. So we've got 20 minutes. I'll lead the charge on this one, given my background with Integration Suite, and Ush is going to probably ask me some questions as I go through it. But here we are. But this is Ush's area of familiarity for sure. So Ush, what I want to do, and what I started to do last night, is I popped over to, and we went over this last time. So just a quick 30 seconds. This is the cluster manager where we create brokers. And I've got one here called US1. And US1 is an environment that we use quite a bit. And what I did is I went into this environment and I created in advance a queue. And so just created a queue. And if we go to messages queue, you can see that it's empty. And if I go to subscriptions, you'll see that I have one subscription. So is it right to say, Ush, that the way that I think about it is that a queue becomes a client basically to the advanced event mesh, and it's based on a subscription. So that's the way that I think of it. I don't know if that's right or wrong, but what would you say to that?
Yeah, that's a way of thinking about it. If you can say that the queue is a client of the topic.
Mm-hmm.
And so just like any other service or consumer that may be listening on that topic, so is the queue.
Okay.
The benefit is the queue provides that persistence layer. Yeah. So it can get the topic messages and queue them up and save them up for when there is a consumer ready to consume those messages.
Gotcha. Okay, perfect. And so then we have this queue, no messages inside of it. And just remember, the subscription is tutorial with a slash, and the name is Garage. So the question is, how quickly is it possible that in the next 15 minutes we can create a scenario from scratch that would allow us to basically grab those messages as they're being populated into the queue and just republish them as another message underneath another topic. We won't get into the mapping and stuff today. We don't have time. But if I go to design, so I'm in the designer now, push for Integration Suite. I go to my package. Okay. And then under artifacts, I can now jump into edit mode.
And so what are we editing, Scott?
Yeah. So we have this package. Sorry. We have this package up here that I've called AEM, Advanced Event Mesh. And I've got 6 artifacts. And you can see there's a type here. There's some iFlows, integration flows, and there's some message mappings. So you basically can create these artifacts and then mix and match them. So if you wanted to share a message mapping amongst your iFlow, you can create it separately, or you can build it directly in the iFlow. So what I want to do now is build a brand new iFlow from scratch by simply clicking here and saying, yeah, let's create a new iFlow. So let's do garage test. Now I could specify the sender and receiver here. I'll just say okay for now. And then we will pop into garage test. And here we have it. We have a generated template for us. And I'm going to hit edit. And so now when I click on it, an arrow will appear. And so when I basically take that arrow and drag it across, what it's going to say to me then is, hey, what's going on here? Which protocol, which adapter do you want to use? So I'll pick AMQP, and I'll pick TCP, I believe is the one I'm going to use. And then I'm going to specify the WebSocket after, which is when I started this down the first path, I selected WebSocket. I got a bit hung up. I went back, I picked the TCP, and everything was fine. So you can start with TCP. And then if you happen to be new to Integration Suite, which probably if you're watching this call and you've been using Integration Suite, this will not be news to you, but there's 3 dots at the bottom, and depending on the size of your screen, sometimes it's not immediately apparent, but there's some properties there. So when you select AMQP, the properties come up, and there's basically 2 tabs that we need to populate. So then the question becomes, well, where do I get that information from? The host and the port. So now if I were to go back over to service details, on this broker here, there's a connect tab. And underneath the connect tab, you will see AMQP listed there. So, and when I expand it, which I'm not going to do right now, I'm going to flip this over to my other screen for a second while I grab some of the information, which some of it you will see, but some of it I don't want you to see. I'm going to grab that and I'm going to close it down. I'll just bring it back for a second here. Get rid of my chat in the background here. And so if I bring this back up and I go back now to Integration Suite, what you will see on that screen when you hit the connect, so if you want to try this yourself, it gives you the host and it also gives you the port. So just be careful. Like I did a couple of times, I just grabbed everything and I threw it into the host. And of course it didn't connect because it wasn't in the right format. So basically we have a host, we have a port, and we can leave this as is. And then here you see it has AEM credential. So what I did in advance is I took the username and the password that's on the Connect tab from over here, and I created a credential inside of Integration Suite. So I can show you where that is in a second, but when you go to the monitor, there's a place in there where you can create security credentials, and then the iFlow will use that at runtime to make sure it can connect. So that's basically one side of the equation. So if I just control, I'm going to copy the host name, and then on the other side, I'll do the same thing, and we'll use the same adapter, AMQP, TCP/IP, and we're going to do the exact same thing. Although I just remembered I forgot something over here, but we'll go back. So we're going to publish that. And I think it was 5671. Were you sharp enough to remember that, Ush?
Yep, that is.
Okay. And then, but now I want to show you the difference between on the sender side and the publishing side. So let's just go back to this one for a second. Notice on the processing side, I didn't fill it out. So you'll notice it's asking for a queue name. So I believe we put garage as the queue name.
Sure.
And we're basically just going to leave everything else here empty. But now, and this is one option, reading from a queue. What we're hoping to have available in the future with the adapter that we're building is that you'll be able to subscribe to a topic and or a queue, and then build iFlows based on topics or queues. But that's coming in the future. So now if I click back on this one, however, you can see that in the processing tab, I can do either or. I could process and direct it towards a queue, or I can do it to a topic. So if I did topic and I said, let's do, I'm reading from the garage queue, but let's publish to this destination, Solace/garage. So just like that. It's case sensitive, Ush, do you know?
It is case sensitive. So what you just did there with the capitals would be different from what you're doing right now with lowercase.
Okay, so let's make it all lowercase. So let's save that.
And so this is basically just a simple iFlow, right, Scott? Or a typical one where you have somebody publishing a message, which is the sender, using AMQP, and then so is the middle box where all your processing happens? Exactly.
So the explanation that I used to provide all the time when I worked at SAP is everything that you see inside the rectangle, and this is the simplest of simplest iFlows. So if you look at some of the ones that SAP provides, which they provide an amazing amount of content for customers to get started with, there might be 30, 40, 50 boxes inside the rectangle because they're transferring messages, augmenting, excuse me, calling out to other systems, stuff like that. So this is a really simple one, but everything that you see in the rectangle runs in the cloud. And then it's the adapters that let you hook into maybe even something on-prem, another cloud system, an API that's external, et cetera, and so forth. But now we're in the, and of course you have your palette at the top. So where you could drag those options in and play with them later. So, but what we've done now is we've designed it. We haven't deployed it. So what we can do now is we can hit the deploy, let this iFlow be triggered. And then on the left-hand side here, underneath the monitor, we see that there's an integrations tab that we can select. So I'll pop over there, and then what you're going to see here, it says manage integration content. If I click on that, it says garage test, and it already says started. So it's already been deployed and started. But if you notice, all integration flows basically 0 in the past hour. So now, if we were to do something like this, let's try something.
So does 0 mean it just hasn't run yet? Is that what that means?
Yeah, nothing's triggered it yet.
Okay.
So the theory is good when you're doing something live. The theory is always great until you try it. So the theory is, what should happen now if we publish a message that has the criteria that lets it hit that queue, aka if we publish something somehow that causes a message to show up in this garage queue, this iFlow should activate, it should take it, and then it should publish it immediately to this Solace/Garage topic. Okay. So if we had a way to log into the broker and be listening on that topic, we might see something if it works. So the question is, are we going to try it? So not kind of by design, the reason why I used the subscription here. So let's go back. Let's go back for a second. We all recall here for a second, I went to this queue and I went to Garage, and the subscription on the Garage was tutorial /. Well, not by coincidence, I have this new single notification card. And by the way, if I were to take this, let's just stop sharing for one. How do I do that now? I'll go back here for a second. If I go back here and I stop sharing, if I were to put this link in the chat for you and I, let's do that. So this is a really simple UI5 application that you should be able to click on and get to that screen. That's the theory. And if Keshav was there and he wanted to participate, whoever else is online wanted to participate, that'd be awesome. But I'm going to share my screen again and go back, because I'm going to do it just to make sure that we have something to show. And if I pop over here, so now I'm back here. So let's fill this out. Actually, you know what? I'll do it on the, I'll do it on my side. I'll do it here, so I'll know if it's working or not. So if I publish this, problem with the Wi-Fi, it's the bane of my existence. And if I had put in my contact person here and I submit it, no, didn't go through. So sometimes I had a little glitch with the WebSocket. Try one more time. There you go. So, which is really busy. So he's filling up the screen with a bunch of messages, which is awesome. So now let's go back for a second here. So if we were to look at this, we can see that the queue is empty, which I'm guessing now, which means messages are coming in very, very fast. And if we did it right, the message went into the queue and it got picked up by Integration Suite, and now it's already gone. So if I go back to the monitor now, and I bring up this screen, you can see all integration flows in the last hour. Boom. These are all a result. Garage test, there it is right there. So Garage test has been kicked off maybe probably, I guess, 5 times, the exact number of messages that you kicked off. And let's prove that that is the case. So if we go back now to the broker, now if people were paying attention, what did we have as our publisher? Do you recall?
Is that a question to me?
Yeah, let's see.
Well, I think it was tutorial / greater than, right?
Yeah, so it's that was the subscription, I
Oh,
believe.
yeah.
And then when we published it, let's just make sure so people see the relationship here. So if I were to go like this and go to the processing, we have Solace / Garage. So if I go back to here and I type in Solace / Garage and I subscribe. Now, what I'm going to ask Ush to do, so just by way of context. So right now I'm logged into the broker with a test client. And what's happening is what we just saw in real time is that somebody submitted a message immediately and
nice.
it came through Integration Suite and landed here in the test client. So we know that it went through the queue, got published by the Integration Suite, and then was published on this new topic.
Scott, you might want to scroll down just to see the text. Let's see who actually published, because that wasn't me.
Okay, so somebody else published one in here. I'm not sure who, but it came through.
Contact
So
with Giuseppe.
yeah, so that's cool. So people can get in there and publish those messages in real time. So we see that it's actually working. So that's the, I'm just going to stop sharing my screen now. So that's basically what I wanted to get people to see today. I'll just do a little recap if I can find my window. So yeah, so two things here. What we wanted to kind of show was a little bit behind the curtain. So we did part 1, introduce some concepts. Part 2, we introduced the platform. And part 3 today, I wanted to show how we built this little application and how people can real-time enable, number 1, a UI interface being built with SAP technology like Fury, integration cards, WorkZone, all those different applications. So we showed that and a little bit of the code behind how to hook up an integration card using that into the advanced event mesh. And then second, where I think there's a huge opportunity is for customers that are now going down the path of thinking, how do I build all of my future iFlows? Consider making them based on an event, because what that eliminates is having to schedule them. And for all the reasons we talked about, having simpler, more compact iFlows, easier to debug, more flexible, it's certainly an amazing way to do that. But that would be that's a summary for today, my friend, Mr. Shukla. Any parting comments? As always, I appreciate you being here.
Well, thanks for having me. No, I just want to say that's the first time I've ever seen an iFlow, so it's kind of cool seeing it come together. Seems neat. So.
Yeah, it's quick, right? I mean, of course, it was an easy iFlow for sure. There was nothing in the middle. There's no meat to that iFlow, but on purpose, that wasn't the goal to show people how to use Integration Suite. It was to show how easy it is to hook up advanced event mesh. Like literally, it took 10 minutes from start to finish.
Yep.
And then just to kind of get it hooked up there. But anyway, thank you very much for the time, my friend, as always. And until we maybe consider a part 4, we're over and out, and have an amazing day.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Scott.
See ya. Have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye.